Hi, my name's Jason, and I'm going to show you how to make mashed potatoes, because I think a lot of times with food, especially simple food, people tend to overthink it, and mashed potatoes are something that everybody should know how to make. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to start with russet potatoes. There's red potatoes, there's all kinds of different potatoes. A lot of times the red potatoes is going to have a lot more starch, or excuse me, more sugar and less starch. That's great for like a potato salad or something like that. But when you want that really fluffy, creamy kind of mashed potato consistency, russet's the way to go. So what I've already done with these, it's just under a pound of potato. I've already washed them. So what I'm gonna do is peel them real quick. You wanna make sure that you've washed them before you peel them, because as you peel them, if they're not washed, that dirt will get all over the potato that you're gonna use. And then you're gonna have gross, dirty potatoes, and that's gross. What I've also got here in this pot, this is a 4-quart pot. Size of your pot matters. If you're just doing a few potatoes, like I'm doing, this is just for about 2 people, then you're gonna want to use a smaller pot. If you're making this for 6, 10, 12, 14 people, certainly you would use more potatoes, and with more potatoes comes a bigger pot. You don't wanna overcrowd the pan, you wanna make sure that everything has the right amount of space to cook and move evenly. So once your potatoes are peeled, you go to cut them. How you cut your potatoes is up to you, but I'll tell you the easiest way, especially for mashed potatoes, is to cut them a little bit smaller so that they cook a little bit faster. I don't like to wait around 30 minutes for potatoes to cook. Also, when you cut them smaller, they tend to cook a little bit more evenly. So you've got your whole potato like this, cut it in half. And then you can cut those halves in half again. And then you can cut those into little pieces. It's very important when you do this that your pieces are roughly even. If you have a piece like this, like I do, that's really a lot smaller than another piece, this piece of potato will cook much faster than this piece, which means this is either going to disintegrate and turn into nothing, while this is raw, or this will be cooked and this is garbage. So just make sure that you've got them as even as possible, and that will help you have the most evenly cooked potatoes, which will come in very handy when you're mashing them. So we're gonna do that with the other potato real quick. And then the most important things with mashed potatoes specifically, anytime you're cooking a potato like this, you start it in cold water. Your pan has to have cold water. Potatoes are super permeable, so the water will get into them pretty easily. But if you start them in cold water and heat them on the stove that way and bring them to a boil, then the heat will distribute a lot more evenly. And again, you're gonna have more evenly cooked potatoes, which will lead to easier mash, which will make them taste better, which will make your friends like you. So, we've got that. We've got our potatoes in a pot of cold water. We're gonna put this on the stove. We're gonna put it on high. Once it comes to a boil, we'll take the lid off. We'll let it boil until these things are fork tender. Once they're fork tender and just about that, you don't wanna go too much because then they release too much starch and become gluey. So once they are boiled and fork tender, we're gonna drain it and we'll go from there. So potatoes are in the cold water in the pot. Before you turn it on, make sure you salt it. If you don't salt it now, the potatoes are never gonna taste as good. It's kind of like grits. If you don't salt at the beginning, it's never gonna be able to get that same right salt level that you want. So we've got salt in the pot, cold water, and potatoes. We're gonna turn it on. Again, once this comes up to a boil, we will turn it off, strain it, and then we'll go to our next step. So our potatoes have been boiling for about 8 to 10 minutes, give or take. They're fork tender, and I know I said that earlier, and all I mean by that is just grab one out, take one here, you take a fork, easy, goes through. It's not so much that it mashes easy, but it doesn't like fall apart. There's still a little give and a little structure to it. So that's all I mean by fork tender. So, turn this off. We'll take our potatoes, take them over to the sink, get them strained out. You don't need to save this water. Sometimes you'll hear about with pasta, you have to save the pasta water, which you do need to save the pasta water. But with potatoes, that's not the case. You're not using starchy potato water to make your mashed potatoes taste any better. So those are gonna sit in the sink draining for a minute. While that's happening, we're gonna take the same pot And we've got in here, we've got just about a half a cup of milk. You could use cream, you could use, I don't know, an alternative milk, like maybe an almond if you wanted to. I'm not partial to that, but you could, especially if you have to. And then 2 tablespoons of butter. So we put those in the pot, just like that. And we'll put the heat back on. We don't need this to boil, certainly, but we do need it to pretty much melt the butter and get the milk to where it's just scalding. So it's not quite boiling, but definitely bubbling, especially around the edges. When it gets to that point, I'll show you. I also, at this point, like to add a little bit of salt. Some people want to add white pepper so that your potatoes look a certain way. I'm not so into that necessarily. I think that if you see a little chunk of black pepper, that's all right. But it's important that you add those here. Adding it later is fine too, but you want to at least start with a little bit in this. You want your milk and your butter to be warm, if not hot, when you're adding it to hot potatoes, so that the potato, when it breaks down and mashes, it's going to absorb a lot easier. The fat is going to melt into the potatoes, and the potatoes being warm are a lot more accepting to a warm liquid than a cold one. So right now, we're almost there. So if you want to take a look at the pot, see how at the edges it's boiling? That's all you need. You can turn the temperature off. We come get our potatoes. We put them in the pot. And then we mash away. So I took the potatoes in the pan with the butter and the cream, salt and pepper off the stove. I like to mash it off the stove. Do what you want, but for me, it's just a little bit more of a stable thing. So you take your potato masher and you just go through. You're just trying to mash up your potatoes and incorporate those potatoes into the butter and milk, cream, whatever you're using. At this point, if you wanted to add bacon, cheese, sour cream, green onions, whatever you want to add to it, you definitely can. But this is just basic mashed potatoes. You can pass it through a sieve, you can try and make a potato puree. I could show you all of those different things, but this is just about mashed potatoes, so we're just gonna mash these potatoes. You don't wanna overwork them. If you overwork them, all that means is that you're putting too much time and effort into making them as smooth as possible. Mashed potatoes are gonna have a little bit of that bite and a little bit of that chunk to them, and that's part of the charm of mashed potatoes. So once you've got it to a consistency that you like, give it a taste. Make sure that it's seasoned nicely. And they are. And that's it. That's mashed potatoes. Thanks.